I'm going into the high density planning changes that are going to reshape the areas within 800 metres of 10 train stations across Perth. I want to go into what this is going to mean for the people that own a property within that 800 metre radius. I'm going to look at how this might change the suburbs. Is it going to be a net positive overall benefit? What are some of the negatives? And how is this likely to shape out? These apartments and units are going to sit in very high amenity with lots of incoming cafes and amenities and things that'll be part of the developments as well in transit rich locations, and they'll typically still have high rental appeal for renting out and command a decent rental yield because of those factors. If you're a property owner in those areas, I'd be keeping your property. If you're looking to make a purchase, this is the type of X factor that you could also put on the top of a purchase that should see demand increase for your property over the next 5 to 10 years.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
G'day and welcome to Perth Property Insider. I'm your host, Jared Mann, and today I'm going into the high density planning changes that are going to reshape the areas within 800 metres of 10 train stations across Perth. I want to go into what this is going to mean for the people that own a property within that 800 metre radius. I'm going to look at how this might change the suburbs. Is it going to be a net positive overall benefit? What are some of the negatives? And how is this likely to shape out? So what's actually being proposed? The Cook government is creating 10 stations, or 10 station precincts rather, where the WA Planning Commission, not the local councils, are going to control zoning, building heights and densities within 800 metres of the station. The tools they'll use are improvement plans and improvement schemes, which are going to set the planning framework for each precinct, basically what can be built where and how tall, and it's going to shift the main decision-making power from the councils to the state, which is going to be through the WAPC, West Australian Planning Commission. Ultimately, they're aiming to streamline approvals and unlock more urban infill housing supply around the rail stations. And this is WA's version of the Transport Orientated Development, or TOD, push that we're seeing in New South Wales and Victoria, concentrating more medium and high density housing around the train stations and metro stations. So what stations are affected? There's 10 of them. I'll read them off. There's the Balladura, which is on the Morley to Allenbrook line, Bassendean, Carlisle/Oat Street, Claysbrook, Cottesloe, which is one of the contentious ones, Glendalough, Morley, Mosman Park, another contentious one, Redcliffe, and Swanbourne, which is rounding out the third contentious one. You might have picked up a trend there that each of those ones that are probably being fought the hardest are in the western suburbs, where there's a much stronger not in my backyard sort of NIMBY community that opposes density and has done a lot of times in the past, and it's made it very difficult for councils to move things through there. So the government's already flagged that more stations are likely to be added later. And ultimately, let's go into some of the key planning changes that are being proposed. What are the changes on the ground? Well, who's the boss? Before, it was the local councils that set the zoning and the height limits and then assessed most of the applications. After these changes, it would be the West Australian Planning Commission that writes the improvement scheme and then becomes the primary decision maker for development inside each of these precincts. Councils can still comment, but they no longer control the rules. So that's why some of the councils are very much up in arms about that. What can be built? We're expecting upzoning with more R codes, with mid-rise and high-rise apartments allowable, and a mixed use with apartments with shops below, especially very close to the stations. The exact heights and densities haven't been finalised yet, but the whole point is that higher density will be near the stations, which is what the ministers are openly selling it that way anyway. So where exactly is this going to be? I mentioned it was going to be within an 800-metre radius around each station. That's roughly a 10-minute walk. Both public and privately owned land are in scope, not just government-owned sites. So private residential as well. Now, how many homes might this create? The state is talking about it creating around 35,000 extra dwellings, potentially across the first 10 precincts over time. Now, what does the timeline look like for all of this? The announcement has just been made in November, with reforms to be rolled out next year, so from 2026 onwards. And realistically, it's going to happen in 3 stages. Over the short term, the next sort of 2026, 2027, planning and early development approvals will commence. So the improvement plans and schemes will be drafted, advertised, and then finalised. Early, well-capitalised developers will move quickly on obvious aggregation sites, so combining sites together and getting projects underway. There's not likely to be a flood of construction yet, but value expectations in these, especially in these precincts, are going to start shifting for those that are now sitting on a development site, which is where the exciting opportunity can lie. And over the medium term, from 2028 to 2032, there's likely to then be visible construction. So once the new controls are locked in and finance conditions cooperate, hopefully, you'll see mid-rise and high-rise projects underway, especially at Balladura, Morley, Redcliffe and Cottesloe, which have been flagged as the priorities by the government. Longer term, over 10 to 20 years, there'll potentially be that full build out of 35,000 odd new dwellings, and it could easily take a decade or more, as seen with similar precincts in Sydney and Melbourne. So it's not next year there'll be towers everywhere. It's a structural shift in how these suburbs will evolve over the next 10 to 20 years. Now, let's take a look at the likely impact on residential property. For land and houses that are inside that 800-metre ring, the biggest winners on paper are going to be the land owners in the rezoned areas. Properties there are going to become feasible development sites. So if they've got a good frontage, the larger lots, the corner positions, if they can be amalgamated with neighbours, you'll typically gain a land value uplift once the higher densities are allowed, and even before anything is built. So even just with the potential, as it gets closer, that'll start to become priced in with the potential. But I think early days, there's still going to be good value to be bought with potential upside in there. So experience from other cities shows that the upzoning often raises land prices for the development sites, and because you're selling more floor area potential per square metre of dirt. So for the existing house owners, the site value goes up in those precincts, but the detached house appeal may go down over time as the area becomes busier, more built up and noisier. So some of the negatives to start considering that'll happen over the next 5 or 10 years. So you get that developer premium, but you potentially get a lifestyle discount if you're going to remain living in there and you wanted a quiet suburban home. So for investors, the play is more about that future redevelopment value than it is about yield, because on a 1960s house that's got that going to be likely to be, you don't want to buy something with too much building component, especially if someone's just going to knock it down anyway. People will be wanting to pay for the property for its land value. So that usually means having a lower rental yield in the meantime, so you don't waste too much money on the building component. So lower rental yield's not for everyone, but can form a good part of an overall portfolio that's well designed. Now, what about the apartments and units? How are those end residents and buyers how's it going to shape out for them? So in the short term, the policy is going to attract more apartment projects to these precincts. Industry bodies such as the Property Council of WA and the UDIA WA are basically cheering that on and saying that these are logical places for density. Over the medium term, there's going to be more supply of new apartments, and that can cap prices in those areas if supply exceeds demand. So that'll be something to look out for, and especially to consider if you've got higher density, if you own a high density apartment already in some of those areas. So the incoming supply will likely impact values and put a ceiling on them. So these apartments and units are going to sit in very high amenity with lots of, incoming cafes and amenities and things that'll be part of the developments as well in transit-rich locations. And they'll typically still have high rental appeal for renting out and command a decent rental yield because of those factors. So you might not get the growth in owning one of these end apartments because of, especially if supply does exceeds demand for some time there, but you'd likely get the rental yield because they will be attractive for tenants. So the net effect for apartments near stations is usually strong demand because it's walkable for the tenants and residents, close to the train station, often a new product, so it's shiny and modern, but you're going to have more competition. So lots of similar new units in there whenever it does come time to sell something or rent something.
Just real quick before we continue on with the episode, are you getting my email updates yet? If you're not, you're missing out on our suburb intelligence reports, which we tailor and prepare for your individual suburbs of interest, showing advanced stats and insights. Must get onto those. And I also send out exclusive invitations to our events, including webinars, sundowners, and workshops. So if you're not getting those, head on over to investorsedge.com.au/join and make sure you're receiving my email updates.
So capital growth is often subdued and people buy it more for the rental yield and for the amenity if you're going to live there yourself. Now, let's take a look at what it's likely to do for rents, affordability, and first home buyers. So as you would know from if you listen to the show ever, Perth is severely undersupplied. And the Grattan Institute, through its research, has pointed out that house prices and new listing rents have roughly doubled since COVID, and that 3/4 of residential land within 30 kilometres of the CBD is zoned for 2 stories or less. So very low density compared with some of our other capital cities. Adding density where the jobs and trains are is one of the few levers that the government has to ease that pressure. And the national modelling from this Grattan Institute has suggested that broader upzoning, not just around stations, could help ease rental prices by as much as 12%. So that's still going to take a long time to get to that point, and it's only going to affect that type of dwelling or comparable. So potentially other units in that suburb, rents might start to ease if there's more supply of units. So for renters and home buyers, that reform is good news overall, I think, because it's going to enable or create more smaller, cheaper dwellings of 1 to 2 bedrooms and townhouses, give people a more affordable option to get into the market and give these residents better access to public transport, reducing car dependence and costs such as, associated with ownership. But it's going to take years. And if most new product is pitched at higher price points, the impact on affordability could be less than hoped. So now let's take a look at the suburb populations and demographics. So it's going to be more of a gentle intensification for some areas. And for other suburbs, it's going to be quite a big step change. So near city areas like Claysbrook, Glendalough and Cottesloe already have some medium density. So these reforms are going to layer more height and scale on top of that. And when we look to places like Balladura, Morley, that are tied to Metronet's Morley-Allenbrook line, those are the new line that they've put northeast, they're expected to grow now into major sub-regional centres with thousands of extra residents. So that'll be a big change for those areas especially. What we can expect demographic-wise is more young professionals and downsizers, fewer bigger families within that 800-metre ring, and a shift in tenure towards more renters and investors. So that demographic change is part of what worries some of the long-term locals that want to remain living within those precincts. Now, what might the impact be on local amenities and infrastructure? On the upside, the programs that have happened elsewhere in Sydney and Melbourne have seen they've tended to deliver a better local retail, cafes, parks, and public realm as part of their larger mixed-use projects. So that's tends to be positive. Metronet investment plus extra bodies on the ground are going to help support more frequent train services, bus interchanges, and better walking and cycling links. So that's what will come from intensifying more residents around those train stations. But on the risk side, if schools, health services, parks and roads don't keep up with that extra population, locals in those areas are going to feel the congestion, the pressure on parking and services long before they feel the benefits. And in Sydney, the first TOD precincts have already drawn criticism for not locking in enough affordable housing and enough infrastructure up front. So that's a big warning for WA. We don't want to end up creating a worse place to live as a result of this extra density. So what are the experts saying? We've got three main camps, and we've got the state government and industry. So the Planning Minister, John Kerry, of course, he's coming out and saying a lot of positive things about it. It's his policy. He's saying it's going to supercharge the delivery of more supply in targeted locations, that some councils lack the ability or the will to enable enough housing. We've got the Transport Minister, Rita Saffioti, framing it as using Metronet to drive transit-orientated development to support vibrant communities. And then there's a lot of other positive comments from the Property Council of WA and UDIA. And of course, they're in favour of higher density and building it where the infrastructure already is. Now, when it comes to the councils and residents, the WA Local Government Association has consistently raised concerns about the erosion of local decision-making and community accountability in state planning pathways. So they really want things to stay as they are and still keep control. And the biggest areas of contention seem to be Cottesloe and Swanbourne, where they'll be powerless to stop new high-rise projects once the WAPC is in charge, and there's expected to be a lot of local opposition to that. So a lot of councils and residents are feeling that there's going to be a loss of their local voice and a local character. So that's understandable. Change is always difficult and it needs to be well managed. So that's where, I'm sure there's a bit of concern as to what exactly is going to be done to the local town centres that they might have lived in for decades, might very well love just the way they are. So understandable. And then there's the planning and housing researchers, which are giving more conditional support. So the think tanks like Grattan Institute argue that Perth's low density zoning is a big driver of why today's prices are so high and we're in a rental crisis. So they're really pushing for more well-located homes in areas to try to make housing affordable again. And academic reviews of upzoning show mixed results where supply does increase where demand is strong, but prices don't always fall, especially if demand is keeping up with supply. And very often land values rise because the development potential is more valuable in those areas, inner precincts within 800 metres of the train stations. So the research line is basically this is the right direction, but it must be done well with design, quality, infrastructure, and affordability in mind. So what could go wrong? What's some of the key negatives to cover? Well, when we consider character and overshadowing, taller buildings can change the feel of a traditionally low-rise suburbs like Cottesloe, Mosman Park, Swanbourne, with overshadowing, taking away view loss and more built form along key streets could really change the character of those areas. Second big negative to cover, there could be traffic, parking and congestion issues. So even though it's meant to reduce car dependence by being close to the train station, many residents will still drive. And without parking management and local road upgrades, traffic and parking wars are likely to be flashpoints. Then we've got the construction impacts. So a long pipeline of projects means years of construction, noise, dust and disruption in some of these pockets. There's the risk of mediocre design as well. So if controls focus on height and yield without strong design, quality and streetscape standards, you could get real glut of horrible apartment blocks that age poorly. And then finally, the other potential negative is equity and affordability. So overseas and interstate, there's been some upzoned precincts have delivered a lot of new stock, but relatively little affordable housing, leading to criticism that it's not affordable for locals. So it'll be interesting to see if they get that mix right. It may be hard initially for developers to create the housing at the affordable end when the cost of building is so high still. So is this positive overall for property owners and residents? Well, for property owners in the high density areas, I think it's going to be net generally positive with caveats. So the development capable sites, they're going to be likely to be the big winners with land value uplift as densities increase. The standard houses within that 800 metre ring are going to become more valuable because of that future development. But the downside is going to be, if you're living there, more noise, traffic, and perceived loss of character. Some owner-occupiers may eventually cash out and move further out. So for investor owners, the reforms improve the fundamentals. So there'll be more demand for well-located housing, strong rental base, and future options to redevelop or sell to a developer. And for residents overall, including renters and first home buyers, I think it's going to be a net likely positive in the long run if it's done well. So more housing choice where people actually want to live and work, better access to trains, jobs and amenities, more vibrant local centres. Over time, there'll be a moderation of rental and price pressure compared to doing nothing, although it won't magically make Cottesloe cheap. But in the short term, there's going to be pain with construction, conflict of the changes and everyone getting on board with them, fear of the change around them all. And if infrastructure and design lag behind, some precincts could feel overloaded or poorly planned. So hopefully that gives you some good insight into pros and cons. Overall, I think it's very net positive. And I think the state government's got to do something to create high density housing and more affordable options. And I can't see it progressing if it's left in the hands of the councils. So if you're a property owner in those areas, I'd be keeping your property. If you're looking to make a purchase, this is the type of X factor that you could also put on the top of a purchase that should see demand increase for your property over the next 5 to 10 years. So if you do want to get in touch to chat about our buyer's agency services and how we use our trifecta method to find properties with the best chances of high performance, get in touch and we can show you just what our methodology involves and how we're making fantastic purchases for people with lots of upside still to come. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. If you've liked this episode, share it with friends, subscribe, and post a review. I always love reading them, so thanks for tuning in.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.